Carta is transforming how private capital operates. They're the leading provider of software purpose-built for everyone in private markets. From 50,000 companies managing equity across 160 countries to 8,500 funds and SPVs representing nearly $182 billion in assets. SEO has been a proven growth engine powering this scale, and in recent months, they've also gained strong AI search visibility that's driving real pipeline results. To dive deep into that, I'm happy to have Lucy Hoyle as my guest today. Lucy is content marketing manager at Carta, and she represents a new breed of content marketers, the so-called content engineers. She oversees editorial processes, content strategy, and AI workflow optimization for international markets, building scalable systems that turn content strategy into pipeline results. We'll talk about how SEO differs from AI search, why Lucy has been an early champion of the content engineering movement, and her POV on successful content marketing in the age of AI. That being said, Lucy, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Nicholas. Thank you so much for having me today, and I'm looking forward to diving into all things SEO and AEO.
Thanks so much for coming on. Let's start with a personal question. So just to get going. So how did you end up in content marketing?
So I studied literature and languages at university, and so yeah, I did English and French as an undergrad. I went on to do a master's for research in French and Francophone studies, which sounds very niche, and it was. But I picked up the skills that I needed to dive deep into a topic, to kind of understand its nuances, and to then figure out how to communicate that knowledge to a non-expert reader. And so I think those skills have been so important for moving into content marketing and just content in general. When I came out of uni, I wanted to work in publishing, did a few internships, and actually ended up at an ed tech startup that was based in London, and they were trying to disrupt the industry. So it was kind of like the Spotify for textbooks. They were sort of taking quite a traditional industry and trying to innovate it and disrupt it that way. So that was a really exciting kind of foray into tech, and I realized that I love working at a startup, and almost saw kind of like the other side of that industry and realized that I probably didn't want to work in publishing. It was very slow to change. It was very traditional. It was quite hierarchical. And then when I'd been at the company for about 3.5 years, I kind of just hit the ceiling. I didn't see much room for growth. And so I started exploring other opportunities. I'd also always looked at, so I was on the content team, I'd always looked at the marketing team and been like, they're having so much fun. And so, yeah, I realized I probably wanted to work in marketing, and yeah, managed to combine what I was doing with content with marketing to create content marketing. And I also moved to a kind of faster paced industry, which is like finance or fintech. So yeah, that's how I ended up here.
And do you also have this habit, so I'm completely guilty of it, that if you look at content that other companies put out, you can't just read it or enjoy it. You always have to have this X-ray view on the thoughts that are behind that and strategies and everything?
Yeah, 100%. And I was doing that when I was at university as well. I couldn't pick up a book without analyzing it really, really deeply. So I think, yeah, most content marketers have probably got this ingrained sense of analyzing or criticizing everything. But I think that's maybe part of the beauty of it, because you're able to read beyond the surface and kind of try and understand the intent behind a piece of content. And ultimately, the more aware you are of kind of what's going on in the world around you and how other people are doing things, the better a marketer you'll become.
Now at Carta, you're obviously, so to say, on the bright side of business, because content marketing is working pretty well for you, and you have a big effect on that also. But there are also a lot of companies out there, not necessarily struggling with content marketing, but maybe just not seeing the results they had hoped for or they're hoping for. So I'd like to know what's if you look at the industry, at your industry, but maybe also other industries, B2B SaaS in general, what would you say are some mistakes or the biggest mistakes you see others doing with their content and maybe also their SEO strategies?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. The main thing I'd say is that so many companies make the mistake of writing and publishing content in a vacuum. They get kind of overly excited or possibly even obsessed with their product, which is totally fair enough. And if you're a startup, obviously you're very product first and you're kind of given instructions to push the product and benefits and features and stuff like that. But they kind of forget to focus on what their audience really wants. And yeah, so many people kind of make the mistake of not doing enough kind of audience research or not actually speaking to customers or prospects. They also, I think, fail to think about distribution. One of my colleagues who joined our content team recently, she says distribution is the content strategy. And I couldn't agree more. If you're basically like writing content that only you're interested in or your company's interested in, throwing it up on your blog and kind of just hoping that the views and the leads will come, it's not going to work. Even if you get a little bit of initial traffic, it's going to fall off a cliff after like a week or so. And I think it's something we've definitely been guilty of at Carta, and we're now trying to kind of think about, well, instead of just creating like one piece of content that is going to live for like a week and then be useless, how can we like create like a kind of bucket of content or a cluster of content that can be repurposed by different teams in different formats and for different audiences? So I think like, we've kind of realized the mistakes that we've made in the past and seen other companies do it. And we're shifting more towards this kind of like content life cycle approach where you're taking an idea or a kind of a topic and seeing how many kind of pieces of content you can get out of it. So I think that's two of the kind of key mistakes. Another one is specific to B2B SaaS, I guess, like not having a strong brand identity and not like taking a stand on a topic. A lot of companies kind of, whether they're too scared or they don't really have an opinion on something, they'll just kind of regurgitate what they're reading or hearing from other people. And something that we've been trying at Carta over the last year or so on our social media channels, but also in content, is developing a very strong brand voice. And if you look at our kind of the evolution of our socials over time, it's gone from being quite kind of corporate to very tongue-in-cheek. And we're kind of like engaging with other like companies and on LinkedIn and kind of, just like making it a bit more fun. And so I think it's a mistake to think that B2B SaaS can't be fun, especially in a regulated industry like finance and equity and sort of fund management. I think adding in a bit of kind of personality goes a long way, especially when you've got this glut of AI generated content these days.
And do you feel like other companies are just too scared to like develop an opinionated voice or take a stand on some issues? I mean, it doesn't have to be politics, obviously. It can be anything in the industry or like having a clear POV. I also feel like that's like what's probably not just working in social, it's also working well like in content marketing in general. But what's holding others back?
It's difficult to say really without being on the inside of it. I think like maybe small startups like struggle to kind of know what their identity is, and at Carta as well, like our brand has evolved so much over like the last sort of few years, let alone since we started as eShares rather than Carta. So kind of like not being afraid to develop your brand voice and to kind of think, well, we were doing this wrong before, like we're able to change now, and also changing with your audience. Like Carta was initially just like a cap table company for private startups, private companies, and now we're moving into like fund management. We do like fund tax. We're kind of building this ERP vision. And as our audience has changed, like our brand messaging has changed because we realized that speaking to startups isn't going to cut it anymore. And so I think like maybe some companies just like haven't kind of been on that evolution, or they haven't kind of been around long enough to really take a stance on anything. And possibly fear drives it. I think it's very easy for brands to kind of like try to compete by being too similar to each other. There's this fantastic book called Different, and I can't remember who wrote it, but it talks about kind of like challenger brands and disruptors and the importance of like differentiating your brand. And that's probably more important than ever actually in the kind of like the age of AI. So I'd say like being able to figure out what it is that makes you different rather than trying to compete with everyone else by doing exactly what they're doing. I think that's a crucial element there.
And what do you say to people that differentiate between like the good content marketing, being, for example, putting out primary research or doing like a survey in the market, and then SEO being like this remix content we're just putting out what has been said 100 times already? Like what do you say to those people that have a rather negative, or that like see SEO as not being like the real content marketing?
I would say that you're probably doing it wrong. Yeah, I think like SEO gets a bit of a bad rap, and at the end of the day, it is kind of just like an acronym, right? It's like it can mean what you want it to mean, and I think the mistake that people make with SEO is kind of like thinking about only focusing on kind of keywords, or just like what is everyone talking about, what are the kind of content gaps and stuff. And actually, like you say, the importance of doing that primary research and writing about topics that resonate with your audience, but also drawing on like your expertise as a company. You don't have to say the same thing as everybody else, or obviously it has to be accurate, but I think like having a particular spin on a topic is a really good way of actually standing out as a company, but also as a kind of content team. And I think as well, like getting involved in the issues at source. So something that Carta does really well, we have a policy team, and they actually go out and they kind of interact with the US government, and they sort of like, with Senate and stuff as well. And they're trying to improve the private markets for our audiences, but just in general. And so we're kind of at the forefront of these issues, and we're actually kind of like helping to lobby and create solutions for them that we can then write about and communicate to our audience. So it's the way that we're building products, the way that we're interacting in like sort of like legislation, that gives us a stance on something, and it allows us to kind of say we're the experts in this, and we're actually so invested in improving the way that the industry works that we're going out and we're doing that at like a sort of government level. So yeah, I think like finding a way of actually like meeting your audience where they're at and showing that you're invested in kind of making practical changes as well that you can then talk about in your content.
Makes a lot of sense. So it's basically drawing back on the having a stance on things, also doing interesting things, also like maybe doing things others aren't doing. So talking to people others aren't talking to makes a whole lot of sense. Speaking of SEO, as I already said in the introduction, SEO has been a growth engine for Carta over the last years. It has worked really well for you. But then this, it's somehow a sudden moment came around with the launch of ChatGPT, and then everything after that is history. Sounds too pathetic. But when did you realize that the rules of SEO and everything in that space is changing with what we now call AI search, AEO, GEO, whatever?
I think it was like most people around the time that Google launched AI overviews in the US back in May 2024. And then obviously it kind of rolled out internationally more gradually. So because I live in the UK, I've kind of seen, like I've heard about all these changes going on, and then like my team's talking about them, and then I kind of have seen them a little bit later. But yeah, I think that was kind of around the time that we started realizing that things were going to change. But initially there wasn't really like much immediate danger for us. Carta.com is still getting like traffic, and we had a healthy lead pipeline from Google. And to date, it's still our biggest channel for like content related traffic and touch points, even as kind of we're getting more referrals from ChatGPT, Perplexity, and the likes. And initially we were being rewarded by AIO, so Google AI overviews, for our high quality content. Like we've always over-indexed on like subject matter expertise, like drawing on kind of our own data and like sort of internal experts, and that hasn't changed. And I think that's something that will always hopefully hold true. And so we were like, right, this is the change is happening, but at the moment we're doing quite well out of it. And then I think earlier this year, so earlier in 2025, zero-click search trends started really picking up. And I think we kind of realized it was time to actually like maybe have a bit of a rethink. And around that time, our CMO, Nicole, who's just been a massive supporter of kind of like the way that our content strategy is changing, she got wind of AirOps. So I know it's a platform you're very familiar with. And I think it was an article called the 10x content engineer, which we're obviously going to talk about a little bit more later. But yeah, she kind of got wind of this article, and I think her CMO group on WhatsApp were talking about AirOps, and people were like, has anyone used it? And so I think we kind of realized that we needed to not only kind of rethink our content strategy, but also look at tools that were going to help us kind of like stay ahead of the curve. And that's where AirOps came in.
Very interesting. Let's talk about AirOps and everything that's connected to that in a sec, because there's all this new stuff now, talk of the town, like content engineering, AEO, GEO, etc., AI search. But there's also a lot of debate, and so from my feeling, it's especially coming from SEO people that basically AI search and everything is so depending on who you're asking, is 80 to 90% SEO. So it's just good SEO.
Yeah.
And like, what's your feeling on that? So what's something from the classic, if you can call it that way, classic SEO playbook that you feel like is still relevant today? And would you agree with that statement that basically AEO is 80 to 90% SEO?
I would say yes, I agree. I think it's very easy when sort of like you see things starting to shift and everyone kind of panics. They're like, oh, there's this new thing and all these new metrics we need to be focusing on. And yeah, like if you were doing SEO right, like you should still be doing well from AEO or whatever we want to call it. And I think like looking forward, like if the AI bubble bursts and kind of like people then rethink the way that they're thinking about like content marketing, like you realize that all of these sort of acronyms don't really matter, and it's just all about high quality content that's relevant for your audience or your ICP. And that's something that hasn't changed. It hasn't changed in a long time. It hasn't changed from when people were writing books about content. They were like, yeah, like they had to become an expert in something to be able to publish a book on it. And they're writing in a way that they think is going to be useful for the people they're writing for. And yeah, so I think that hasn't changed and that won't change. Also leaning on like subject matter experts, as I say, we do a lot of Carta, having a strong brand voice and taking a stance, yeah, rather than just kind of regurgitating what everyone else is saying. That ability to stand out and to differentiate yourself was true of SEO and it's true of AEO. And obviously there's some stuff that's changed in terms of the way that you structure content and trying to kind of, I think with SEO, the guidance was to not talk about your brand or your products too much and just purely focus on kind of educational content. Whereas with AI search, obviously the information that LLMs get about your brand and about your products, a lot of it comes from your content and your website. So trying to kind of like mention your brand name as often as you can without kind of trying to kind of fix the system actually helps, because LLMs then learn to associate your brand name with a specific topic, and you become kind of like an expert in that in the kind of AI mind. So yeah, there are a few things that have changed, but ultimately, if you're focused on writing good content that serves a purpose for the people you're trying to sell to, then you're going to do okay.
But that's probably the biggest misconception, right? Because when people say 80 to 90% AEO is SEO, they imagine a person doing really high quality SEO and content work. Whereas, I don't know, like let's say at least probably half of companies engaging in SEO were still doing keyword stuffing, putting out 300 to 400 word desert articles without any graphic or any like unique insight. Or like would you agree? So that's like a little bit of the misconception about this whole SEO equals AEO thing.
Yeah, I think so. And as I said earlier, like if you think it's not working, you're probably doing it wrong. And so yeah, like SEO in the sense of like what it should mean in terms of like high quality, like genuine, like content that people are going to be interested in. That is what AEO is. And yes, there's structural differences, but ultimately you're going to be rewarded for like quality. And I think like thinking about like the way that like content is going and just the way that people are consuming information, like I'm quite concerned that the more sort of AI generated drivel there is out there, that will then inform the research that people are doing on topics. And obviously LLMs are learning off that information. So we'll get to a point where like we can't even believe whether the information is true. And I think that's why it's so important for people to still be leaning on subject matter experts and like to be fact checking content and making sure that it's accurate, because otherwise we're just perpetuating this cycle of like hallucination and misinformation. And so yeah, like I would agree that AEO is majority SEO if you're doing it right. And if you're not seeing results, then it might be time to kind of like, yeah, rethink the way that you're approaching it, and to just go back to basics and like speak to your audience and go from there.
You mentioned a really important keyword or topic, which is AI generated content. And I already introduced the term of content engineering or content engineer. And so before we dive into that, can you quickly give us your definition about what is a content engineer, or would you describe yourself as a content engineer?
I think a content engineer is one of those nice terms that's quite fluid. So I guess like anyone working in content could be a content engineer. I would describe myself as a content engineer just because I feel like I kind of embody the mentality and the skill set and the desire to kind of like learn that is required of a content engineer. The way that I see it is kind of like you're marrying the kind of like the technical kind of like logical side of like SEO and kind of search consumption and behaviors with the kind of creativity and strategy needed of a good content marketer. And I think like the way that I kind of like came across the content engineer term and why I kind of decided to like jump on that train was because like I like a lot of kind of content marketers, when I first heard about AI, I was terrified that it was going to take my job. I also refused to use AI for content generation. It was a couple of years ago, and someone said to me, you should really be using AI. And I was like, I don't want to, I'm a writer. Like it goes against everything I believe in. And I think over time, have realized that adapt or die kind of thing. If you don't kind of jump on the train, you're going to get left behind. But also B, it's like just rethinking what writing is and what content marketing is. Like, just because we're not kind of writing everything from scratch anymore doesn't mean you're not a good content marketer. And it's about using that time and the resources that you would have spent researching a topic, writing something from scratch, and using it to build systems that do that for you. And I think a good content engineer has to be someone that has done that writing and has done the grunt work, because you then know how to build the systems that can do it well. Whereas if you kind of just come in from an engineering mindset and you don't understand what the output you want is and what the context you need to put into the system, then you're going to get something that's kind of not resembling kind of proper content, if that makes sense. And so I think, yeah, that like being able to marry the two and to have experience of writing is really, really important. And for me as well, like I think I was struggling to kind of find my thing. As I said, like I was a little bit scared that AI was going to kind of take over. And I started to get interested in SEO mainly because my dad has an SEO background, and kind of he used to come home from work and talk about it. And I was like, this is kind of interesting. And then I learned how to kind of apply it in my work. But then when kind of AEO started kind of taking over, I was like, do I want to really put my eggs in this basket if SEO is going to disappear? Obviously it hasn't. And it was a case of like right place, right time. It was a priority for Nicole, our CMO, and I was obviously interested in AI search and AI generated content. And so, yeah, kind of just jumped on the train, and I'm still riding it as far as I can. And I think, yeah, getting signals from the market and like SEO influencers that this was going to be a big shift. I was picking up on a lot of signals that it was important to the business, it was important to the market, and I was just really interested in it. I've always loved like patterns and puzzles, and I think like learning how to prompt an LLM and to build systems is a bit like learning a language. And as I said, like I studied sort of like languages up until master's level, so I think it just felt like it clicked with me and my skill set.
So you're one of the few persons that work in online marketing that don't have a hard time telling their parents what they actually do for a living.
Yeah. I mean,
that's one key takeaway from me right now.
It is quite handy. I mean, some of the AI stuff does kind of go over their heads a bit.
Yeah.
But like having kind of being able to speak to my dad about like the way that like people are kind of consuming content and how that's changed. And I actually had a really interesting discussion with him over the weekend about it. And as I say, he kind of had an SEO background, but initially he worked in libraries, and he was literally kind of like categorizing books. And it was around the time that the internet happened, and he kind of saw that and was like, this is going to be big. And so he kind of like similarly jumped onto that train, and then he got involved early on enough to kind of like really understand how it worked, and he kind of then made a career out of like using digital advances to improve legacy systems. So in the library, the sort of Dewey Decimal System, everything worked by like catalog, and so he implemented kind of like tech systems and use the internet to kind of streamline that. He then went on to do it for universities and e-commerce, and now he does it for the NHS. So it's like, yeah, that kind of journey of like seeing a system that's broken and being like, how can I use tech for good to kind of improve it and but still maintain that kind of like human element as well. I think super important.
Nice. Do you think this story, like of your dad and experiencing it firsthand, was a driver for you to question your early rejecting of AI and to like actually make the decision to say, hey, wait a second, he was at a similar point in his life and look how it turned out quite well.
Yeah.
So maybe I should also like reflect on my position again.
Possibly, yeah. I think like some things are subconscious, right? It's not like a kind of conscious decision, but yeah, seeing that like you can use like tech for good was quite an important driver. But also and I can't put my finger on like the turning point, but I'm just so passionate about it now. And I think before I saw it as a threat, and now I see it as like an enabler and like an empowerer. And also the more that you work with AI, you realize that it's not quite there yet. Like you still need a human in the loop. And I think there's so much that we can learn from it. I always say that like learning how to prompt and learning how to kind of build systems has made me a better communicator, because at the end of the day, like an LLM can only produce what you've told it to, and like the output is only as good as the input and the instructions you're giving it. And so if you're not really, really clear, A, about what you want the output to look like, but B, about how you want it to go about creating this content, you're going to get something that's really rubbish. And similarly, when you're interacting with human stakeholders, if you're managing a project or in a meeting, if you're not really specific about what you need people to do, when you need them to do it by, and what you expect from that output, that deliverable, you're not going to get the result you want. And so I think seeing LLMs as actually like a way to improve human communication as well is something that I realized sort of throughout the AI journey, and I've kind of like stuck to that and seen AI as like a really positive thing for my development as well.
So besides yourself and your dad, you already mentioned another person that was influential in like this whole movement for yourself and for Carta, which is Nicole, your CMO. She also described you as like an early champion of the content engineer mindset, but so she seems to be a pioneer of like at least within the C-level level of the whole AI search and seeing it as an opportunity thing. But I also hear, or like I talk to CMOs, or I read their POV on AI search being overhyped, not being relevant to their industry, etc. So what do you feel like? What did she saw, or what is something that clicked at Carta and clicked like with Nicole, and also maybe from your exchange that hasn't clicked yet for other CMOs?
It's a really good question. I think like we're slightly spoiled at Carta in the sense that like we were doing really well with SEO and like our content is amazing, and we've got like a wealth of proprietary data. We produce loads of data reports, and so like we were kind of already ahead of the curve. And then when sort of like AI search started happening, and we saw that like it was affecting so many companies across the board, like in a really negative way, but we were still kind of like, yeah, we were like seeing sort of like slight declines in kind of like traffic from Google and touch points and clicks, but we were still kind of managing to stay level with our metrics. And so I think seeing that, and then she realized that, okay, like there's a reason that we're doing well with this, and like can we double down on that and like figure out what's working, and then also like what we need to be doing to kind of like future proof, because at the moment, as I say, like the majority of our traffic is still from Google, at least to our kind of content, but there will come a point where that might flip and the ratio will adjust, and so she's always sort of said to us, let's keep doing what we're doing well, but let's keep in mind that there might come a point where we need to shift slightly so that we're indexing more on the stuff that's going to work for AI, and just kind of keeping abreast of that, and like, yeah, looking at the metrics, seeing what's going on externally, and just kind of keeping an ear to the ground. And Nicole is amazing she obviously has to kind of have an overview of so much across our marketing org, because it's like over 100 people and we operate in like all over the world. But she has this ability to kind of dive really deep into something and to ask the right questions and ensure she really understands something. And I think seeing that level of engagement from someone in the C-suite is really empowering, and it gave us the confidence to kind of be like, right, we've got this. It's working so far. Let's kind of like continue to build it, and to know that she was not only going to invest in tools like AirOps, but in us as people and in us as a team. And I think, yeah, like that, having a leader that is willing to kind of put their trust in their people to know what they're doing, I think is maybe something that other CMOs aren't getting right.
And what would you say to someone listening or watching now, where their CMO or VP marketing or whatever marketing executive is maybe still hesitant? What would your advice be to those people on how to maybe convince the C-suite or convince the marketing executives like to lean more towards AI search, experimenting there, and like placing the first bets?
I would say try and understand where their hesitance comes from. Is it a fear of AI? Is it a misunderstanding? And yeah, like similar to writing content that resonates with your user, see this as like a content project. Like your audience is the C-suite. Your goal is to persuade them to invest in AI search, or to invest more heavily in tools, or your team. And so you need to understand like what they need to know, where the kind of knowledge gaps are, and what's driving that kind of hesitation. Because if it's misunderstanding, then you need to focus on kind of like teaching them about AI search and why it's important. If it's fear, then you need to reassure them. So that'll affect like the tone of the way that you present it. And I think trying to be consistent in your messaging, like it's not gonna be one presentation that's going to change their mind. You need to kind of like see all of the touch points, like share articles with them, kind of maybe go on LinkedIn and try and sort of develop your personal brand and interact with kind of like SEO, AEO influencers, and just like build up a kind of almost like a portfolio of kind of like evidence for the importance of kind of AI search, rather than just pinning everything on one presentation, and just kind of gradually sow the seed, and use data, use evidence to show why it's important. And I think something I learned from a conference, I think Women in Tech SEO, which is a fantastic conference that they run around the world. And one of the presenters said something about even if you don't have your own data on something, use like market data or data from another company and then apply it to your company. So if you are trying to figure out like what it's costing you to not be producing as much content as you could be, if like a tool like AirOps could help you produce more, you can like use a case study of another company and see how much kind of revenue they've gained by producing X amount of content. And you could kind of then trace that back to your own company and say, this is what we're losing because we're not investing in AI search. And I think that sort of like revenue number and almost focusing on the loss of inaction, the cost of inaction is so important for someone in the C-suite. So yeah, coming up with creative ways of like persuading them, rather than kind of just going, AI search is really important, and hoping they'll understand.
I think the cost of inaction, it's like it's a really, so it obviously then like drills down into a lot of different parts, but like understanding this concept is super critical. Now you already touched on AirOps quite a few times, and now's the time to dive really into that, because there will probably be, since it's a relatively new tool, like relatively in quotes. So you know it, I know it, but can you explain to someone that has never heard of AirOps before what the F is AirOps and why are we both, I think, raving fans?
Yeah, I mean, this is the challenge, right? It's kind of like zooming out from something you use on a daily basis and trying to make it understandable.
This is what we're here for.
Yes, exactly. And so AirOps on the surface is a kind of content creation and optimization tool, which is a load of buzzwords basically. And there's loads of other tools that do that. But when we were evaluating kind of like various tools that do similar things, the reason that AirOps stood out was because it's so customizable, and you can basically chain these workflows. So rather than sitting down and prompting ChatGPT 50 times a day to produce a piece of content and give it context every time, with AirOps, the context is built in. So you create a brand kit, you talk about your ICP, you talk about your products, you talk about your brand voice, and like, as I said, taking a stance on something, you talk about like, yeah, your perspective on a particular topic or an industry. You provide it with writing samples, and it uses that when it creates content, or when you build a workflow, you can draw on that context, and you can upload like your sitemap. You can loads of examples of your existing content, and so you train the model yourself on your own content, and it's being so like sort of hyper flexible and personalizable. You can it's a bit like Lego. You just kind of plug in all these different steps, and then you prompt the different sort of the LLM steps, and then you can chain workflows to build out a grid, and so you can kind of run 10 workflows all at once, and so something that would take you maybe a few hours on ChatGPT trying to do 10 articles and manually prompting it every time, you can literally just click a button on AirOps and sit back. Obviously you've got to build the workflows yourself, and I think the amazing thing about AirOps is that they have so many like internal experts that are on hand to support you. So when we signed up, we basically got an onboarding team, and they're helping us build things, and they offer like training cohorts, and sort of they've launched this thing called AirOps University to try and get people to learn how to prompt and how to build workflows. And they're not just invested in selling their product, they're invested in like this content engineering movement. And they've understood perfectly that if you train people how to use your product and you teach them the importance of good prompting, of systems thinking, you're going to get not only like kind of super users, but evangelists. And they've now got people like us that go out into the world and we rave about AirOps because we've been taught the value of it. They've invested in us learning about kind of like AI search, about building workflows, about content engineering, and so I see AirOps not just as a tool, but like as a kind of movement, really. And it's the amount of like releases they do is amazing. They're constantly building new things, and then they've also got a AI search visibility aspect to the platform as well, that they're kind of like developing in tandem with their customers, and so we're giving them feedback, and then they're building new features. And so just that kind of that attitude of like growing with your customers, I think, is so important.
And how big of a role does AirOps play now in your content operation?
It has like a central role, but it's not everything. So I see it as like the kind of the content engine, or the engine behind our content machine. So it's kind of like everything is kind of like run through AirOps, and it helps us like speed things up. But you've still got to add fuel to the system. You still got to drive the car. And so it hasn't taken away from our team. Like, we've not got rid of anyone. It's just like enhancing the way that we do things. So it's like an enabler, it's like an enhancement, but it's not a replacement. And so it's just helped us be massively more productive, and also to then use that time to spend on other things, like more creative projects, kind of middle of funnel stuff, bottom of funnel stuff, because the top of funnel SEO educational content is we're doing it like that with AirOps. It's helping us kind of like produce content that's like SEO friendly, but also AEO friendly. And as I say, with that ability to kind of draw on your brand kit, it's relevant for our target audience, and it has our brand voice at heart. So that kind of like increased efficiency and productivity is important. But I think the main gain, I think, is the mindset, like the way that we're thinking about content strategy now, the way that we're thinking, we do this at the moment, we do it manually. Could we do it in AirOps or in another like AI tool like NAN I use quite a lot? Are there other ways of doing it? And I think it just encourages you to like think outside the box.
Quick FYI, we're recording this on November 11th, and just yesterday I quickly checked. AirOps announced their 40 million Series B.
Yeah.
So obviously not only Lucy is a raving fan, not only me, but also they're fairly successful at what they do. If you think about a company like, I don't know, maybe just like Carta, and they had a little bit, or like they had a lot of success with SEO before, but maybe also a company that is a very like forward thinking, but they don't have like this, positively speaking, SEO legacy. What would be like, how would you decide if AirOps is the right tool for someone? And when would you say like maybe AirOps is not the right tool for you? What would be like your main thoughts around that?
It's a really interesting question. I think AirOps is not the right tool if you're using it as the be all and end all. If you're literally going to be like leaning on it to do everything for you, it can. But I think if you haven't put enough thought into your content strategy, into your brand voice, and into like distribution and the kind of like the output you want, and if you haven't spent time really kind of engaging with your audience and yeah, kind of writing the content yourself and realizing the thought process that goes into it, and you're just kind of turning to like a tool like AirOps to just kind of do everything for you, I think you're not going to get the outcome you want because you don't know what outcome you want. And as I said earlier, like the reason that I kind of like just found like really resonated with content engineering is because I've had that content writing background, and I knew how to do it manually, and I also knew the pain points of doing it manually. So yeah, I'd say like if you don't have a content strategy yet, if you don't have a strong brand voice, spend some time developing that and really kind of like going out to the market, engaging with your audience, testing different formats and different kind of lengths of content, and then use that like really rich context and research to then build a kind of like a workflow or a grid on AirOps. I think like trying to go from like 0 to 100 and just like rely on AI, you're not going to get very far. Whereas like kind of, yeah, go from 0 to 1 manually, and then the rest you can kind of scale.
But what would you say to people that say, hey, there are all these different tools out there, I'm not going to say any names here so I don't get sued, that promise me to just like whatever, produce 200, 300 articles within like a couple of minutes, fully AI generated. Some might even scrape competitor sitemaps and just like steal the content, so to say, and then rewrite it. This takes me like an hour investment, and you're now telling me that AirOps is super AI powered, but still you need human in the loop and all of that, blah, blah, blah. I don't have time for that. What would you say to someone like that's arguing that way?
Yeah, it's a fair point. I would say to them, look at the performance of the content after you've published it. Are you getting any views? Is it falling off a cliff? And because the same principles of SEO and kind of like cannibalization and competitor content still apply. Like you still got to rank in AI search. You've still got to like appear unique and different enough. And if you're literally just scraping other people's websites and putting a slightly different spin on it, you're not producing content. You're duplicating content. And so I'd say, yes, you're right that it's possible you can use a tool that promises you, 200 pieces of content in an hour or whatever, but they're going to be awful pieces of content, at least by the kind of standards of like what humans and what LLMs are looking for. So yeah, again, it comes back to that question of what's the purpose of the content? Are you producing it to say you've produced 200 pieces of content in an hour, or are you producing it to really resonate with your audience, to take a stand on a topic and to drive leads through that content?
Yeah, it feels to me, just as a minor addition, it feels like the same get rich quick schemes. They never work. There's no shortcut to real long-term success. You just have to put in the reps, otherwise it won't work.
Consistency.
Yeah, exactly, 100%. But speaking of evaluating the content and like what is good content, so there's obviously the element of quality, but you also mentioned that you evaluate the content with certain KPIs and that you look at metrics, etc. And I feel like there's still a lot of debate, like what are the metrics that are relevant now and for the future? Like, is it visibility? Is it impressions? Is it traffic? Is it leads? Is it pipeline? Is it whatever? So there are a lot of options out there in terms of metrics. So which should I pick? What metrics are you looking at as Lucy and maybe also as Carta?
I think like it's a fantastic question. I don't think anyone really knows at the moment, to be honest. As you say, there's so much kind of discussion and people are kind of like using a lot of buzzwords, and it's all meaningless unless you can like link it back to like your goals as a company, your audience, the channels you're distributing through, and the purpose of the content. Like if you're generating content just to rank, then you're obviously going to look at tracking rankings and on Google or like on AI search. If you're generating content to generate revenue, you're going to want to look at how it's performing like further down the funnel than just like traffic and views and stuff and clicks. And so yeah, it's so different for each company and for each piece of content as well. Like we wouldn't necessarily look at the same metrics for an SEO blog post as for like a customer case study or like a gated asset. We would use different metrics because the distribution strategy for those and the purpose of creating the content are totally different. And so I think in general for us, like we still look at views and traffic because it helps us understand how many eyes are we getting on the content and from where. So it helps us kind of understand like we're still getting like the majority of our traffic from Google. At what point will that change? So we still need to kind of keep an eye on that. It's also like directionally useful, even if like it's not the be all and end all anymore. It gives us an idea of like how our performance is evolving over time and whether we need to start thinking about other metrics. As I say, with stuff like gated assets or middle of funnel, bottom of funnel content, we're looking at like touch points, like how many MQLs has this piece of content generated? Like how much pipeline are we generating? How much like revenue has it influenced? Because that helps us kind of understand, right, like content's not just a piece of kind of a resource that we throw out into the world. Like it actually has an impact like throughout our business, and that's also how we argue for like more budget or for like helping C-suite understand the importance of content. It's not just a blog article, it actually drives revenue and it kind of like supports customers throughout their journey. And then obviously there's the kind of like the new metrics like brand sentiment, mentions, citations, and that sort of stuff. We're still understanding, to be honest. As I say, we use AirOps to track all that. And the great thing is because it's kind of like all on one platform, we can then use those metrics to understand like where we're performing and where we're not performing and where perhaps the gaps are. And then we can plug that into a grid and then create content based on those metrics. So it's kind of like a full life cycle, which is quite nice. So yeah, like I'm not pretending to be an expert in this. I don't think like as a company we're an expert. I don't think anyone is, to be honest. And I think that's the beauty of it. Like we're in this kind of transitional phase where everyone's kind of frantically trying to understand it, and like in 6 months' time we'll probably be looking at different metrics. So yeah, I'd say kind of it's very personal to your company, and try not to get kind of caught up in the hype of like what you should be tracking or shouldn't be tracking.
But even if you're being very humble, you're deep in the trenches and you're probably a little bit ahead of the curve, as you also said yourself, compared to others. So it's really interesting to get your POV on this. You already mentioned different content formats. So a case study, a blog post, a gated asset, etc. How do you prioritize these? So how do you decide, like, I don't know, from the X pieces of content we're going to produce now in November or like in December, we're doing Y blog post, we're doing Z case studies. How is that? How does this process look like?
We don't really do it on like the number of things we should be doing. It's more like so the way that our kind of content strategy works is some of it's internal. So we'll kind of like sit down, we'll be planning a campaign, or we'll be thinking like we've got like to refresh or create new sort of like organic content. But then some of it's externally requested. So we have a form that anyone in our company has access to, and people will request content from us to support campaigns, to support like customer campaigns, like sales campaigns. So we get pulled into partner content, like doing content for webinars. It's so varied. And so we have to try, like my role specifically is understanding how to balance those priorities and how to kind of like plan on teams' resources so that we're kind of like hitting deadlines, but also not kind of completely burning out, and where AI tools can help us kind of speed up some of that process. So it's truly kind of like systems thinking, and you can't really consider any kind of type of content in isolation. It's more, what is the best type of content for this purpose? What is the distribution strategy? What goals are we trying to achieve here? And often if another team has submitted a request for a piece of content and they haven't given us enough detail, I'll go back to them and say, like, why have you asked for a blog post instead of this? Like, how are you going to share this with your audience? What are you like? Are you going to be tracking? Do you want clicks? Do you want like views? Do you want just brand awareness, or do you want to drive revenue from this? And I think those are the fundamental questions before you think about what type of content it is. So yeah, I would say we don't kind of attribute like arbitrary numbers to a type of content. It's more just like is this going to help us hit our goals?
Makes a whole lot of sense. Now, after zooming in so much, let's zoom in out a little bit again. If you think about maybe yourself or your team at Carta, but also let's say the industry in general, like the SEO, AEO, content marketing industry, and you look ahead, like imagine us talking again in like 2 to 3 years and doing like an update.
Yeah.
What will be the same and what will be completely different?
That's such a difficult question. I'm kind of excited to see where it goes. And I think like the change that we've seen even in the last year and a half since Google brought out AI overviews has been like massive. And so what I would hope to see is a shift in mindset where people are kind of almost going back to basics and creating content that is genuinely resonating with their audience. Isn't just like a load of garbage that they've generated using AI, like using AI smartly rather than just like relying on it, as I say, as the kind of like the be all and end all. And I think we're already starting to see a bit of a backlash to kind of like AI generated content, like people's kind of like YouTube channels are growing and Reddit is growing as a channel because people want to hear from other people. They don't want to hear from an LLM. And so I think we'll probably continue to see more of that. Like the people have always wanted genuine, authentic content. It's just the way that they're consuming it has changed slightly over the years. And so I think, yeah, we'll see more emphasis on kind of personal stories and like, yeah, people that are genuinely interested in a topic kind of like user generated content as well. Kind of like customer reviews, like leaning on that social proof and also like more face-to-face stuff. I think a lot of people are exploring like cohort-based marketing, and it's something that AirOps have proven fantastically that it works with their kind of their AI content cohorts and their AirOps university now. So I think, yeah, we'll see more kind of like in-person or online ways of engaging an audience by like teaching them something, but not just through the written word. So yeah, I'm here for it. I'm excited to see where it goes.
And looking at platforms, do you think that Google and ChatGPT then in 2 to 3 years will be basically head to head, or will Google like basically with the whole AI overviews, AI mode rollout, will it stay at the top of the game and ChatGPT will be this like super successful, maybe a billion plus weekly active users thing, but like it won't be the company that has basically pushed Google from the throne?
I don't know, honestly. I don't think I'm kind of like deep enough in the platforms to really like make a call from experience. I would like, from what I've seen, it looks like Google's kind of doing that classic thing of it's seeing competitors kind of catching up, and it's instead of kind of like really differentiate, like focusing on what has differentiated it thus far, which is a very kind of pared back search experience, it's going down the route of its competitors and it's becoming more like them. So I think we're going to kind of see this like merging and possibly we'll get one or two. So like Google, if it kind of manages to kind of maintain that market dominance, and then ChatGPT and possibly Perplexity, and then I think the others might just kind of disappear. But who knows, like maybe people will be consuming content in a completely different way that we haven't even thought of. Like I couldn't have necessarily predicted this 3 years ago. So yeah, like who knows? I think, as I say, like people will possibly index more to like kind of human-based ways of sourcing content. And then obviously there's this massive like trust issue of like, is the content that I'm reading even accurate? So yeah, and I think like the way that like TV has gone, people kind of now like focusing on streaming and like I don't even have a TV aerial in my house, so like I don't watch live TV. And so I think, yeah, anything's kind of up for grabs. And I wouldn't like to make a bet on whether Google sticks around or not, but we'll see.
Fair. Probably better not betting any money on it.
Yeah, I don't have a preference, put it that way.
Yeah. You already shared like a lot of super valuable nuggets during the interview, but when wrapping this up, I always like to leave with a last set of very practical and like hands-on pieces of advice. So if you think again about someone listening to this or watching this, and it's like a fellow content marketer at a B2B SaaS company, or maybe like even not even a B2B SaaS company, but just a company that is generally interested in like this whole AEO, content marketing, SEO 3.0 movement, what would be like your 2 to 3 actionable pieces of advice for someone that generally wants to win, or like generally wants to get results from this new era?
I would say like invest in yourself, and invest, if it's something you're interested in, like invest in learning about it. And it's so easy to get kind of bogged down in the day-to-day, and I'm definitely like guilty of this, like kind of thinking, oh, I'm going to do so much building this week, and then it gets to Friday and I'm like, I haven't done anything. And so I would say, like, think ahead and like block time out in your calendar for learning about this stuff, for building stuff, because otherwise you're never going to get around to it. Like it won't seem like a priority until it becomes your day-to-day. And so you've got to kind of start seeing it as like important enough to prioritize over other stuff, and make it a habit as well. Like if you put 2 hours in every Friday morning, and you'll end up looking forward to that. And so I think, like really, really investing in it if it's something you're interested in. And like finding, kind of speaking to people, like what I've realized, or the nicest thing that I've realized kind of coming into this like kind of SEO kind of bubble, is that people are really friendly and they're willing to share knowledge and stuff. And I think like because it can get quite technical, you get off put because you're like, oh, I'm not an expert, like I'm going to sound stupid. But people are so willing to just like talk, like something like this. Like I wouldn't consider myself an expert, and you possibly would, you possibly wouldn't, but like just being able to kind of genuinely connect with people and like learn from other people is so important. You'll come away from it, if you do it often enough, you'll come away from it kind of just feeling like you know a bit more every day. So yeah, focus on those 1% gains. Don't try and boil the ocean. And if you feel like you're really behind, like you're not. Like we're all kind of like learning as we go. And the beauty of it is that you don't know where you're going to be this time next week.
Awesome. Even pyramids were built one rock at a time. So
exactly. And look at them now.
Keep going. I started to ask a final question a couple of episodes ago, and there were already a few interesting answers. So I'm going to ask you this. What is one thing that I should have asked that I didn't ask?
Ooh.
You didn't see this coming, right?
Oh, I didn't see it coming. Oh gosh. I would have maybe, I mean, we talked a little bit about like the way that like what other kind of B2B SaaS companies might be doing wrong, or the way that we kind of like decided that AI search was worth investing in. But I guess you could have kind of like dug into like, what mistakes have I made? And like what have I've talked a lot about what we're doing right, but what have I done wrong, and what have I learned from that? Because often I think the mistakes and the gaps often speak louder than the success stories.
Can you share 1-2 examples?
Ooh.
Only the ones you're comfortable with sharing.
I'm trying to think now. I think for me, just kind of throughout my life, but also I've seen it more in this kind of like this content shift, is like focusing too much on perfection. I grew up trying to be perfect at everything, had to do everything like 200%, got really frustrated when people made mistakes and when stuff like just wasn't great quality. And now I realize that you're never going to have time to do everything perfectly. So something's got to give. Like you can cut corners just enough to still produce something that you're proud of, and something that's going to do what you meant it to. But you don't have to like cross all the T's and dot all the I's. Like it's, the person producing the content is like an artist. Like if you make a mistake, you're the only one that's going to see that, well, unless it's a glaring mistake, or you're the only person that's going to think, oh, I should have done that, and nobody else is going to care. Like if it's accurate, if it's meeting intent, that's all that matters. And so I think, yeah, like learning that good is good enough and things don't have to be perfect, and that mindset I think has helped me with the shift to content engineering, because you can't be a stickler for everything. You've just kind of got to be like, right, that works, let's move on. And that, I think that's the kind of essence behind like a growth mindset, and like a true innovator is ready to just kind of like move on and look at the next thing.
I really know why I started asking these questions. There's always something very interesting that comes up.
That you weren't
Thanks so much for sharing. Yeah, that I didn't expect at all. No. Lucy, it has been a very, very interesting interview. You shared so much. I have to thank you a lot for coming on. And I can really see people also enjoying the things you shared, and maybe they want to follow along. So what's the best place to catch up, to follow the stuff you're doing, like to learn more about what you're up to? What's the best platform?
Probably LinkedIn. Actually, I'm fairly active on LinkedIn. I would love one day to create a YouTube channel, but it's one of those things. Never have enough time. But yeah, LinkedIn's probably the best place to find me. So yeah, I'll send you my my LinkedIn handle that you can drop in the description.
Cool. Yeah, I will do it. So then, Lucy, thanks so much. Really enjoyed it. Hope to catch up soon, maybe for the update episode, then in 2 years, to see how the predictions aged by then. But other than that, all the best for you, your team at Carta, and hopefully speak soon.
Yeah, this was brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you so much.